Imagine coming home after 3 years of working overseas to provide for your family, only to find your brother living in your house, married to your wife, and your own children calling him daddy because they think you're dead. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name is William Harrison, but everyone calls me Bill. I'm 67 years old now, and this is the story of how my own brother stole my entire life, while I was halfway around the world trying to build a better future for my family. What started as a temporary work assignment in Dubai became a nightmare that would destroy everything I had ever worked for and reveal the true character of the people I trusted most. It all began in 2018 when I was 62 years old and facing a financial crisis that many American families know all too well. I had been working as a senior engineer at a manufacturing plant in Ohio for over 30 years, but the company was downsizing and my position was eliminated. At my age, finding comparable work in the United States was nearly impossible. Every interview ended the same way. They wanted someone younger, cheaper, more adaptable to new technology. My wife Linda and I were drowning in debt. Our mortgage was underwater, we had credit card bills piling up, and our two youngest children, Emma, who was 12, and Jake, who was 8, still had years of school ahead of them. Our oldest daughter, Sarah, was in college, and we were already struggling to pay her tuition. The stress was killing our marriage, and I felt like a complete failure as a provider and father. That's when my brother David came to me with what seemed like a lifeline. David had always been the smooth talker in our family, the one who seemed to have connections and opportunities that the rest of us never heard about. He was 3 years younger than me but had always acted like he knew more about the world. He had never married, had no children, and seemed to drift from one business venture to another without ever settling down into a steady career. David told me about a construction consulting opportunity in Dubai that could solve all my financial problems. A company there needed experienced American engineers to oversee major infrastructure projects, and they were willing to pay enormous salaries to get the right people. The contract was for 3 years, with a salary of $180,000 per year plus housing, transportation, and other benefits. It was more than triple what I had been making in Ohio. The catch was that it was a remote assignment with limited communication access due to security concerns on the construction sites. The company required workers to sign agreements limiting their contact with family members to protect sensitive project information from corporate espionage. Phone calls would be restricted to once a month, and internet access would be monitored and limited. Linda was devastated by the idea of me leaving for 3 years, but we both knew it was our only option. The debt collectors were calling daily. We had received a foreclosure notice on the house, and Jake needed expensive dental work that our insurance wouldn't cover. 3 years of sacrifice could save our family's financial future and give our children the opportunities they deserved. David offered to help look after Linda and the kids while I was gone. He had just ended a long-term relationship and was looking for a fresh start anyway. He could move into our guest room, help with household expenses, and be a male figure for Jake during those important growing-up years. It seemed like the perfect arrangement. David would have a stable place to live, and my family would have support and protection while I was overseas. The goodbye at the airport was the hardest thing I had ever done. Emma cried and begged me not to go, clinging to my leg like she had when she was a toddler. Jake tried to be brave, but I could see the fear and confusion in his eyes. He didn't understand why Daddy had to go so far away for so long. Linda held it together until the final boarding call, then broke down completely as I walked toward the gate. "Promise me you'll come back," she said through her tears. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," I told her. "3 years and I'll be home for good. We'll pay off every debt, buy a new house, and I'll never have to leave you again." David drove them home from the airport and promised to send me regular updates about how everyone was doing. For the first few months, everything seemed to be going well. The work in Dubai was challenging but lucrative, and I was living in a company-provided apartment in a secure compound with other Western engineers and contractors. The communication restrictions were stricter than I had expected. My monthly phone calls home were monitored and had to be scheduled through the company's security office. The calls were limited to 15 minutes and had to focus on family matters only, no discussion of work, location details, or travel plans. It was frustrating, but I understood the security concerns given the sensitive nature of the projects we were working on. During those early calls, Linda sounded good. She told me that David was being incredibly helpful, taking care of household repairs, helping with the kids' homework, and even coaching Jake's little league team. Emma was doing well in school and had made some new friends. Sarah was thriving in college and had made the dean's list. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. But as the months went by, I started noticing subtle changes in the tone of our conversations. Linda seemed more distant, less emotional about our separation. The kids sounded different too, more formal, less excited to talk to me. When I asked about specific details of their daily lives, their answers were vague and sometimes contradictory. I attributed these changes to the natural adjustment that happens when families are separated for long periods. I figured they were developing their own routines and rhythms without me, which was probably healthy. The important thing was that they were safe, financially stable, and moving forward with their lives. What I didn't know was that David had been slowly poisoning them against me from the very beginning. He started with small comments about how I had abandoned the family to pursue money overseas. He suggested that a real man would have found a way to solve our problems without leaving his wife and children. He planted seeds of doubt about whether I really planned to come back, or if I was just using the overseas job as an excuse to start a new life. David was patient and manipulative. He didn't try to turn the family against me overnight. Instead, he gradually positioned himself as the reliable, present father figure while portraying me as the absent, selfish husband who had chosen money over family. He was there for every soccer game, every school play, every bedtime story. He was the one who helped with homework, fixed broken toys, and provided comfort during nightmares. The first major red flag came during my call in month 8. Jake, who had always been excited to talk to me, seemed reluctant to come to the phone. When he finally did, he was quiet and monosyllabic. When I asked him about his baseball season, he said, "Uncle David says I shouldn't get too excited about talking to people who aren't really part of our family anymore." I was shocked and hurt by the comment. When I asked to speak to Linda about it, she brushed it off as just something Jake had picked up at school from other kids with divorced parents. She assured me that David hadn't said any such thing and that Jake was just going through a phase. But the pattern continued and got worse. Emma started referring to events and activities without mentioning me at all, as if I had never been part of their lives. When I asked about family photos or mementos of our time together, she seemed confused, as if those memories were fading or being replaced by new ones with David as the central father figure. The most disturbing call came in month 10. Sarah, who was home from college for Christmas break, sounded strange when she spoke to me. She kept referring to David as Dad and correcting herself, then apologizing awkwardly. When I asked her about it directly, she became evasive and claimed she was just tired from final exams. "Sarah," I said, "is everything okay at home? You can tell me if something's wrong." There was a long pause before she answered. "Dad, can I ask you something? Are you ever actually coming back, or is this just something you're saying to make us feel better? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Of course I'm coming back, sweetheart. Why would you even ask that? It's just that Uncle David says that sometimes people make promises they can't keep, and that we shouldn't build our lives around waiting for things that might never happen. I was furious. David was clearly undermining my relationship with my children, but I was powerless to stop it from thousands of miles away. When I tried to address it with Linda, she became defensive and accused me of being paranoid and controlling from a distance. David has been nothing but helpful, she said. He's here every day, taking care of things you can't take care of from Dubai. Maybe instead of criticizing him, you should be grateful that your family has someone who actually shows up. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. David was there, and I wasn't. He was the one helping with homework, attending parent-teacher conferences, and being present for all the daily moments that make up a family's life. From my family's perspective, I was just a voice on the phone once a month, while David was a constant, reliable presence. But I knew something more sinister was happening. David wasn't just helping my family. He was systematically replacing me in their lives and turning them against me in the process. The problem was that I couldn't prove it, and any attempt to address it made me look like a jealous, absent husband who was trying to control his family from overseas. The situation reached a breaking point in month 14. During what would turn out to be our last phone call, Linda delivered news that shattered my world. "Bill," she said, her voice cold and formal, "I need to tell you something. The kids and I have been talking, and we've decided that we need to move on with our lives. This separation has been too hard on all of us, and we don't think it's healthy to keep waiting for you to come back." "What are you talking about?" I said. "I'm coming back in less than 2 years. We have a plan." "Plans change," she said. "People change. The man I married wouldn't have left his family for 3 years to chase money in a foreign country. I don't know who you are anymore, but you're not the husband and father we need." "Linda, please, don't do anything rash. We can work through this when I get home." "That's just it, Bill. I don't think you are coming home. I think you've found a new life over there and you're just stringing us along. David thinks so too, and honestly, his opinion matters more to me now than yours does." The line went dead. When I tried to call back, the number was disconnected. When I tried to reach Linda's cell phone, it went straight to voicemail. I was completely cut off from my family with no way to contact them or explain my side of the story. I immediately went to my supervisor and requested emergency leave to return to the United States. I was told that breaking the contract early would result in severe financial penalties and legal action. The company would sue me for the cost of my housing, transportation, and training, plus punitive damages that could total more than $200,000. I would end up in worse financial shape than when I started. But I was willing to take the risk. Losing money was nothing compared to losing my family. I started making arrangements to break my contract and return home immediately, regardless of the financial consequences. That's when David made his move. Using my company contact information, he sent a message to my employer claiming to be my emergency contact back home. The message stated that I had been killed in a car accident while on leave in the United States, and that my body had been sent home for burial. He provided fake documentation, including a death certificate and obituary, to support his claim. The company's response was swift and bureaucratic. They expressed their condolences, processed my final paycheck, and closed my file. My personal belongings were packed up and shipped to David as my next of kin. My company housing was reassigned to another employee. As far as my employer was concerned, William Harrison was dead and the matter was closed. Meanwhile, back in Ohio, David was implementing the second phase of his plan. He told Linda and the children that he had received a call from Dubai informing him that I had been killed in an industrial accident at the construction site. The company, he claimed, was trying to cover up the accident to avoid liability, which explained why there had been no official notification. David provided fake documentation to support his story: a death certificate, an accident report, and even a letter supposedly from my supervisor expressing condolences and explaining the company's decision to handle the matter quietly. He told the family that my body had been too badly damaged to be returned home, which explained why there would be no funeral or burial. The family was devastated but not entirely surprised. They had been conditioned by months of David's manipulation to believe that I was unreliable and that something like this was bound to happen. David positioned himself as the strong, steady presence who would help them through their grief and rebuild their lives. But David's plan went far beyond just replacing me emotionally. He had discovered that I had a substantial life insurance policy through my previous employer in Ohio. The policy was worth $500,000 and listed Linda as the primary beneficiary. However, David had also been researching the legal requirements for claiming life insurance benefits, and he knew that Linda would need to provide extensive documentation of my death to collect the money. This is where David's plan became truly diabolical. Using his fake death certificate and supporting documents, he helped Linda file a claim with the insurance company. The process took several months, but eventually, the insurance company paid out the full $500,000 benefit. David convinced Linda that the smart thing to do with the insurance money was to pay off all the family's debts and invest the remainder in a new house in a different neighborhood. A fresh start, he said, would help the family heal from their loss and move forward with their lives. What he didn't tell Linda was that he planned to be a permanent part of that fresh start. Within 6 months of my supposed death, David had moved the family to a new house in a different city, about 2 hours away from where we had lived. He told Linda and the children that the move was necessary to help them escape the painful memories of their old life. The new house was beautiful and expensive, purchased with my life insurance money. David also convinced Linda that the children needed stability and a father figure to help them through their grief. He proposed marriage, presenting it as a practical arrangement that would provide security for the family and give the children the male guidance they needed. Linda, emotionally vulnerable and financially dependent on David, agreed. By the time I had been dead for a year, David had married my wife, adopted my children, and was living in a house bought with my life insurance money. He had legally changed Jake and Emma's last names to his own. Sarah, who was now in college, was told that David was her new stepfather and that she should respect him as such. The children's memories of me were systematically erased and replaced. David removed all photos of me from the house and told the children that dwelling on the past was unhealthy. He encouraged them to think of him as their real father and to forget about their biological father, who had abandoned them to work overseas. Jake, who had been 8 when I left, was now 11 and barely remembered me. Emma, who had been 12, retained some memories but was encouraged to suppress them in favor of building a relationship with her new father. Sarah was older and remembered more, but she was away at college and only came home for holidays. When she tried to talk about me or ask questions about my death, she was told that it was too painful for the family to discuss. Meanwhile, I was trapped in Dubai, completely unaware of what was happening back home. My employer believed I was dead, so they had no reason to maintain my communication privileges or provide assistance. I had no way to contact my family, and my attempts to reach them through other channels were unsuccessful because they had moved and changed all their contact information. I spent months trying to find a way home. Without my company's support, I had limited resources and no legal status in the UAE. I eventually found work with a smaller construction firm, but the pay was much lower, and the conditions were more difficult. I was essentially starting over from scratch in a foreign country, trying to save enough money to pay for my own passage home. The breakthrough came in my third year overseas, when I finally managed to save enough money for a plane ticket and had resolved my legal issues with my former employer. I had been sending letters to our old address in Ohio, not knowing that the family had moved. Eventually, one of the letters was forwarded by a neighbor to Linda's new address. When Linda received the letter in my handwriting, she was shocked and terrified. According to David's story, I had been dead for over 2 years. The letter was either from an imposter or, somehow, I was actually alive. Either way, it meant that David had been lying to her about something fundamental. Linda confronted David with the letter, and he went into damage control mode. He claimed that someone was trying to scam the family by pretending to be me, probably hoping to get money or access to the insurance payout. He convinced Linda to ignore the letter and report it to the police as a potential fraud attempt. But Linda was starting to have doubts about David's story. She had never seen my body, never attended a funeral, and had only David's word that I was actually dead. The letter looked authentic, and it contained personal details that would be difficult for a scammer to know. She started doing her own investigation, trying to verify the details of my supposed death. What she found was troubling. The company in Dubai had no record of any industrial accidents involving American employees. The death certificate David had provided didn't match the format used by UAE authorities. The more she investigated, the more it became clear that David had fabricated the entire story of my death. But by this point, Linda was in an impossible situation. She had married David, changed her children's names, moved to a new house and spent the life insurance money. If I was actually alive, she was guilty of insurance fraud, even if she hadn't known it at the time. David convinced her that it was too late to tell the truth, and that her only option was to continue living the lie. That's the situation I walked into when I finally made it home in late 2021. I had been gone for 3.5 years, much longer than the original 3-year contract because of all the complications David had created. I was exhausted, financially ruined, and desperate to reunite with my family. I flew into Cleveland and took a bus to our old neighborhood in Ohio, only to discover that the house was occupied by strangers. The neighbors told me that the Harrison family had moved away after the father died in an industrial accident overseas. They gave me the address where they thought the family had relocated. The 2-hour drive to Linda's new house was the longest journey of my life. I didn't know what I would find when I got there, but I never imagined the scene that greeted me when I knocked on the door of what should have been my family's new home. Linda opened the door and went white as a sheet. For a moment, she just stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. Then she started shaking and had to hold onto the doorframe to keep from falling down. "Bill," she whispered, "is that really you?" "Of course it's me," I said. "Linda, what's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that?" Before she could answer, I heard David's voice from inside the house. "Linda, who's at the door?" David appeared behind Linda, and the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't surprise or relief, it was panic and anger. He looked at me like I was a problem that was supposed to have been solved permanently. "You're supposed to be dead," he said, almost to himself. "What are you talking about?" I said, "Dead. David, what's going on here?" That's when Jake appeared in the hallway behind them. He was now 11 years old, much taller than when I had left, and he looked at me with complete confusion. "Mom, who is this man?" he said. The words hit me like a physical blow. My own son didn't recognize me. He was looking at me like I was a stranger who had shown up uninvited at his door. "Jake," I said, kneeling down to his level, "it's me. It's Daddy." Jake stepped back and grabbed David's leg. "That's not my daddy," he said. "My daddy is right here." "Ghosts aren't real, right, Daddy?" David put his hand on Jake's shoulder in a protective gesture that made my blood boil. "Don't worry, son," he said. "This man is just confused. He'll be leaving soon." I stood up and looked David straight in the eye. "What have you done to my family?" The confrontation that followed was the most intense and painful experience of my life. David initially tried to maintain the fiction that I was an imposter or that I was suffering from some kind of mental breakdown. But when I started reciting personal details about our childhood, our family history, and intimate details about Linda and the children that only I could know, his story fell apart. Linda broke down completely when she realized the truth. David had stolen 3 years of our lives together and had systematically destroyed our family relationships based on lies and manipulation. She had married another man while thinking I was dead, had allowed him to adopt our children, and had spent my life insurance money to build a new life without me. The children's reactions were heartbreaking. Emma, now 15, remembered me but had been told for years that missing me was unhealthy and that David was her real father now. She was torn between the memories she had suppressed and the loyalty she felt to the man who had been raising her for the past 3 years. Jake's reaction was the most devastating. He genuinely didn't remember me and was frightened by this stranger who claimed to be his father. In his mind, David was his daddy, and I was just some man who was trying to take his family away. He cried and begged David not to let me take him away from his real home. Sarah, who was now finishing college, was called home to deal with the crisis. She was furious when she learned the truth, angry at David for lying, angry at Linda for believing the lies, and angry at me for leaving in the first place and creating the situation that allowed David's manipulation to succeed. The legal implications were staggering. Linda had unknowingly committed insurance fraud by collecting life insurance benefits for someone who wasn't actually dead. David had committed multiple felonies, including fraud, identity theft, and filing false documents. The house they were living in had been purchased with fraudulent insurance money. The children's adoptions were based on false premises, but the emotional and psychological damage was even worse than the legal problems. Jake had lived half his life thinking David was his father. He had no relationship with me and was terrified of losing the only family structure he could remember. Emma was confused and angry, unsure of who to trust or believe. Linda was devastated by guilt and shame, realizing that she had been manipulated into betraying the husband who had been working to support their family. David's response to being exposed was characteristic of his manipulative nature. He didn't show remorse or apologize for the damage he had caused. Instead, he tried to justify his actions by claiming that he had been protecting the family from abandonment and that I had been a selfish husband and father who had chosen money over family. "Look at them, Bill," he said during one of our confrontations. "Look at how happy and stable they've been without you. Jake doesn't even remember you. Emma has thrived with me as her father. Linda has been happier in the past 3 years than she was in the last 10 years of your marriage. Maybe I did them a favor." The arrogance and selfishness of his statement was breathtaking. He had destroyed my family relationships, stolen my identity, and committed multiple crimes, but in his mind, he was the hero of the story. He genuinely believed that he had been doing what was best for everyone involved. The legal process was complex and painful. David was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including fraud, identity theft, forgery, and filing false documents. The insurance company demanded the return of the $500,000 payout, plus interest and penalties. Linda faced potential criminal charges for insurance fraud, even though she had been a victim of David's deception. The house had to be sold to begin repaying the insurance company, leaving Linda and the children homeless and financially ruined. The legal fees alone consumed what little savings they had left. The family was scattered. Linda moved in with her sister. Emma went to live with Sarah temporarily, and Jake was placed in temporary foster care while the custody issues were sorted out. The children's reactions to losing their home and stability were heartbreaking. They blamed me for coming back and ruining their lives, even though I was the victim of David's crimes. In their minds, they had been happy and secure until I showed up and destroyed everything. Jake, in particular, was traumatized by losing David, who he still thought of as his real father. David's trial was a media circus that brought additional shame and embarrassment to our family. The story of the fake death scheme made national news, and our personal tragedy became entertainment for strangers. Reporters called constantly, asking for interviews and trying to get photographs of the family. The children were teased and bullied at school by classmates who had seen the news cover it. During the trial, the full extent of David's manipulation became clear. Investigators found evidence that he had been planning to steal my identity for months before I left for Dubai. He had been researching life insurance procedures, legal requirements for declaring someone dead, and the process for filing fraudulent death certificates. The prosecution also revealed that David had been in financial trouble before implementing his scheme. He owed money to several creditors and had been facing potential bankruptcy. My life insurance money had not only allowed him to live comfortably, but had also paid off his personal debts. Most shocking of all was the discovery that David had been planning to make his theft permanent. Investigators found evidence that he had been researching how to obtain new identification documents in my name, apparently planning to assume my identity completely, while maintaining the fiction that I was dead. David was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for his crimes. He was also ordered to pay full restitution to the insurance company and to our family for the emotional and financial damage he had caused. But like most restitution orders, this was largely meaningless since David had no assets or ability to pay. The aftermath of the trial was almost as difficult as the fraud itself. Linda and I tried to rebuild our relationship, but the damage was severe. She felt guilty for believing David's lies and for marrying him while thinking I was dead. I felt angry and betrayed that she hadn't tried harder to verify my death or maintain faith in our marriage. The children's adjustment was even more challenging. Jake, who was now 12, had lived with David longer than he had lived with me. He had no emotional connection to me and resented being forced to accept me as his father. Emma was angry and confused, unsure of who to trust or how to process the betrayal by someone she had loved and trusted. Sarah was the only one who seemed to understand the full scope of what had happened, but she was also angry at everyone involved. She blamed David for lying, Linda for being gullible, and me for leaving in the first place. Our relationship was strained by her feeling that all the adults in her life had failed her in different ways. The financial recovery was slow and difficult. The insurance company eventually agreed to a partial settlement, but we still owed tens of thousands of dollars in restitution. I had to find new employment at age 65, which was challenging given my age and the gap in my resume. Linda went back to work full-time, taking a job at a local bank to help support the family. We moved to a small rental house in a different city, trying to start over away from the media attention and community judgment. The children changed schools multiple times as we tried to find places where they could escape the notoriety of our story. Jake continued to struggle with behavioral problems and had to see a therapist to help him process the trauma of losing his father figure. The emotional healing took years and, in some ways, is still ongoing. Linda and I went through extensive couples counseling to try to rebuild trust and intimacy in our marriage. We had to learn how to be a family again after years of separation and betrayal. The process was slow and often painful, with setbacks and moments when it seemed like the damage was too severe to overcome. Jake's relationship with me was the most difficult to repair. He had no memories of me as a loving father, only knowledge that I was the man who had taken away his happy life with David. It took years of patience, therapy, and gradual relationship building before he began to accept me as his father. Even now, at age 16, our relationship is still strained and formal compared to what I had hoped for. Emma adjusted better but still struggles with trust issues and anger about the deception. She has difficulty believing that adults are telling her the truth about important matters, and she questions everything she's told about family history or relationships. The betrayal by David, who she had loved and trusted, created lasting psychological scars. Sarah finished college during the worst of the legal proceedings, which affected her academic performance and career prospects. She graduated but with lower grades than she had been achieving before the family crisis. She moved to another state after graduation, partly to escape the ongoing drama, and partly because she needed space from all of us to process her anger and hurt. The experience taught me harsh lessons about trust, family, and the fragility of human relationships. I had trusted David completely, never imagining that he was capable of such elaborate deception and betrayal. I had assumed that family bonds were strong enough to withstand temporary separation, and that love could overcome any obstacle. I also learned about the vulnerability of modern families to sophisticated fraud schemes. David's plan worked because it exploited the natural trust that exists between family members and the bureaucratic systems that assume people are honest about deaths and insurance claims. If David had been less greedy or more careful, he might have gotten away with his scheme indefinitely. The hardest lesson was about the lasting damage that deception and betrayal can cause to children. Jake and Emma were innocent victims of David's crimes, but they suffered consequences that will affect them for the rest of their lives. Their ability to trust authority figures and form healthy relationships has been permanently damaged by the experience of being manipulated and lied to by someone they loved. Looking back now, I can see warning signs that I missed at the time. David's eagerness to help with my family was unusual given his previous lack of involvement in domestic responsibilities. His knowledge about my work situation and financial problems was more detailed than it should have been. His suggestions about communication restrictions and his role as the family's primary support person positioned him perfectly to control the narrative about my situation. But I think the truth is that I wanted to believe David was genuinely trying to help. I was desperate to solve my family's financial problems, and his offer seemed like a miracle at exactly the right time. I was also proud and didn't want to admit how dire our situation had become, which made me vulnerable to accepting help without questioning David's motives. The experience also revealed uncomfortable truths about my marriage and family relationships. Linda's willingness to believe that I had abandoned the family and her quick acceptance of David as a replacement suggested that there were problems in our marriage that I hadn't fully recognized. The children's relatively easy adjustment to life without me indicated that I may not have been as central to their daily lives as I had thought. Today, our family is still rebuilding and healing from the trauma David caused. Linda and I are still married, but our relationship is different than it was before. We're more cautious with each other, more careful about communication, and more aware of how quickly trust can be destroyed. We've learned to appreciate the time we have together and not take our relationship for granted. Jake is now a teenager who knows the truth about what happened but still struggles with conflicted feelings about David and me. He understands intellectually that David was a criminal who lied to him, but emotionally, he still remembers David as the father figure who was present during important years of his childhood. Our relationship is slowly improving, but it will never be the natural, easy connection that I had dreamed of having with my son. Emma is doing well in high school and has developed into a strong, independent young woman. She's learned to trust again, but is more cautious and analytical about relationships than most teenagers. She plans to study psychology in college, partly because she wants to understand what happened to our family and help other people who have experienced similar trauma. Sarah has built a successful career and is engaged to be married. She maintains limited contact with the family, visiting for major holidays but keeping some emotional distance from the ongoing recovery process. She's forgiven us all to some extent but hasn't forgotten the pain and disruption that David's actions caused during crucial years of her young adult life. David is currently serving his sentence in federal prison. He's eligible for parole in 2028, and I dread the day he's released. The children will be adults by then, but I worry about what impact his return to society might have on our family's continued healing. He showed no remorse during his trial and sentencing, and I have no reason to believe he's changed during his incarceration. The financial recovery has been slow but steady. We've paid off most of the restitution to the insurance company, and I've found stable employment in my field despite my age. Linda and I are both working, and we've been able to save a modest amount for retirement. We'll never recover the financial security we had before David's scheme, but we've learned to live more simply and appreciate what we have. The media attention has largely faded, though our story still occasionally resurfaces in articles about family fraud or identity theft. I've been contacted by researchers studying elder abuse and financial crimes, and I've participated in some educational programs to help other families recognize the warning signs of similar schemes. Perhaps the most important lesson I've learned is about the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of healing even after devastating betrayal. Our family survived something that could have destroyed us completely. We're different than we were before, scarred but stronger, more cautious, but also more grateful for genuine love and loyalty. The experience has also taught me about forgiveness, both giving it and receiving it. I've had to forgive Linda for believing David's lies and for marrying him. She's had to forgive me for leaving the family vulnerable to manipulation by going overseas. The children have had to forgive all the adults in their lives for failing to protect them from trauma and deception. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what happened. David's actions were unforgivable, and I will never have a relationship with him again. But holding on to anger and resentment would only continue the damage he caused. Healing requires letting go of the past and focusing on building a better future. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.